For those that are joining or have joined, I'm Reid. I am the owner and operator of Walk With You, executive leadership training and coaching, author of the Trust Transformation. And this is a series of conversations I call Trust Under Pressure, where I talk with leaders about how we create a culture of trust, particularly when it can be most challenging and the pressures of the business, our personal lives, and other things all come into play. It's often a complex set of ideas that leaders have to deal with. So if you're a CEO, an owner, a senior executive, or operator, I hope you find the conversations to be helpful and opportunities to tap into the wisdom and the experience of people that have laid the groundwork. In some cases, those at the corporate leadership level, many business owners I talk to. And then today's guest is particularly interesting, talented, and has a lot of great information to share, both at a deep research level, but also at a very practical level. And I'm honored to have him with me today, and honored to call him my friend. And Julian Lute is with the organization Great Place to Work. He has also been with a number of corporate organizations and has a great track record for helping organizations understand how to build, maintain, focus, repair, and restore trust in their organization. So, Julian, welcome to Trust Under Pressure today.
Oh, thank you so much, Roy. So happy to be here. I'm on the West Coast, so you got a little bit of a head start on the day than I do. But when we're talking about trust and talking about what makes organizations thrive and be great and also be helpful for people as well, which we can do all of those things, I'm always game for that conversation. So really appreciate being here. I'll just share quickly. I've been at Great Place to Work for 13 years. I started off as a product manager in our global part of the business. So for a lot of folks that don't know, we operate in about 60 or so countries in terms of having a presence, but we survey people in 180 countries. Basically, almost every single country in the world, we have a presence of some employees that we get their feedback about what makes workplaces great. So the global nature of our work is something that I'm very, very passionate about, and knowing that trust. You can build it here, North America, South America, APAC. You could build trust all around the world. So I think it's relevant for everyone on the call.
That's fantastic. Julian, tell us a little bit about Great Place to Work at a practical level. I know a lot of the folks out there have been familiar with Great Place to Work. Every year you produce the list that Fortune uses and other outlets use to rank best places to work at different levels and in different industry sectors and company sizes. But tell us a little bit about the programs, services, and some of the other benefits that Great Place to Work offers.
Okay, cool. So how can I say this? I'll give a little bit of a history lesson, right? So we basically wrote the book on workplace culture. In the 80s, our original founder wrote a book. I believe it's called The 100 Best Companies to Work For in America. And so, started really talking to employees about what makes their workplace experience great. And what the 80s were like for some organizations. Some of it is you have to read it in a history book, but some of us actually lived through it. It was a different time for corporations and for what was happening with people and labor and the struggles that were happening there. So we learned a lot from that day forward about what people are really looking for. And out of their own mouths, folks wanted trust, and they wanted trust in their leaders. They wanted trust in their organizations and the work that they were doing. And they also wanted to have trust in the people that they work with every day. So that's formed our understanding of the workplace experience for employees. So once we learned that, we just started to apply that model all around the world, and found out that I think our first the first country that we began to survey in outside of the US was Brazil, and found out that trust was something that they were looking for in their workplace experience. And so we've just sort of built on that premise that trust is what builds great businesses. And I think what many people may see from us now is really being much more intentional about connecting the dots between building a great business and building a great workplace experience. I do think some folks think that culture is a nice to have, and boy, it would be great if we had a great culture, but we don't think you can really build a great business if you're not thinking about the experience of employees. And so that at a very high level is what we do. And I'll say we have a survey instrument called the Trust Index, 60 statements that specifically measures trust. And I always tell folks, we're not measuring satisfaction. We're not measuring happiness. We're measuring whether or not you are having a trusting experience around those three dimensions. And we also measure whether the business can feel the impact of that trust experience that folks are having. So every year we get a data set of over 22,000 companies, 20 million employees represented in those surveys, 180 countries. And so some of this might be Julian saying this, and I'll tell you when it is, but the majority of it is what the data tells us every year about what makes great workplaces and what helps people thrive in their communities and also in their job.
That's fantastic. And recently, you all hosted a major summit in Las Vegas and had the opportunity to attend. And I think people might be interested to know a little bit about that event and what it brings together, and what were some of the key things that Great Place to Work shared, and maybe even from your point of view, Julian, some of the key speaker highlights that made it valuable. I mean, I found myself sitting in rooms with incredibly talented people working in a variety of organizations, large and small, as the active agent to try and bring trust and bring a different experience to team members through very intentional effort. But I'd love to get your thoughts on, again, some of the highlights and some of the things that people can look forward to down the road as well.
Yeah, I mean, from the stage, right? You got to hear from leaders from Delta Airlines. You got to hear from folks from Synchrony Financial. You got to hear from folks from Hilton, Marriott. You just large organizations with huge frontline populations. That when you make changes in those sorts of organizations, you actually can change communities. And so it's not, so that's, I think, always one of the highlights, that like you get to hear from organizations that really are shaping our day-to-day experience, in a lot of the things that you do. But what was really stood out to me and always stands out to me is just what you mentioned, Roy, which is this is the event of the year where if you are on any in any part of your journey with building a great workplace, you are going to find your tribe of people, right? We have people who are just jumping into like the employee engagement and trust building. They know that they have a good workplace, but it hasn't been quite validated yet. Or you've got some folks who have been like, we've been working on this for a while and we want to get better and connect with other folks like yourself and other leaders in the space to talk about what it really means to take something that you might hear from Delta. We talked about this earlier, something that a huge practice that you might hear from Delta or Hilton or Marriott or one of the larger organizations. And how do we take that intent and bring that same intent to our people so that they can have this power of purpose? It's walking the halls, there's a buzz of energy. It's not like people are going to sessions to learn software and technology. We are a technology company. We do have software that powers all this. But the intent for the people that show up is, how do we make this workplace better? And as business people, we know that to make the workplace better, we have to serve our customers sometimes much more consistently. And we have to make sure that we're building valuable products and services for them. But it all comes from the power and the labor and the people sharing their gifts every day with us at work. So when I think about the summit, I always think about it's like Disneyland for people who care about culture. You're not a weirdo for asking people about how their culture is doing today and what can you do to learn from them. So all the connections, the brain dates, those were really, really cool too, where you had a chance to get in small groups or one-to-one with folks to actually have conversations about something that's important. There's just so many cool things. I'll say the last thing too, I could run on and on, but we have this thing called the executive leader experience, which is specifically for folks in that mid-sized business range, right?
Mhm.
So you're not 100,000 employees or 700,000 like an Accenture. You're at 200, 300, 400. You're growing, and you're trying to figure out what's the next part of our journey. We had some really specific programming for those folks that went over really well. So, of course, we're going to invest more time and energy there because those folks are the heartbeat of our economy. I think it's 90, 96, 97% of people work for small or medium-sized businesses in the United States. So without those folks every single day in your cities and local counties grinding it out as business folks, our world wouldn't work the way it does.
All great stuff, and truly, the executive experience was the track that I was part of, and found so many great things to come back with, big ideas, and then just the small things that you could be doing day to day to put to work in your organization immediately. And I think that's the value of a conference, is to be able to walk away with actual action items and tools that you can bring back to your workplace. So great event. Well, let's dive into some of both the research and activation ideas that you and I've talked about before a little bit, and what we'd like people to be able to benefit from part of the conversation. So if you referenced earlier the depth of the research that you do and those things, and I would love if you could share some of the findings that Great Place to Work has discovered. I think oftentimes the struggle, and there were these wonderful tabletop signs that reiterated this idea that trust is a soft topic, that the communications that we do these are soft topics, which immediately administrative and some leaders might set those aside as nice to have, when really they are essential to have. And trust is one of those things. So maybe talk a little bit about the research that aligns to both the performance of companies with high trust and the Great Place to Work connection that's made when they create that culture.
Okay, no problem. So one of the things that I'll share to start off is, a lot of companies measure and folks measure engagement, right? And they look at engagement. But the way that we've been able to dissect our research is we see that trust is a leading indicator for engagement. So engagement becomes an outcome when you're building trust with folks. So I'll start at the top. I'm always in rooms with CFOs, folks that are running businesses, and the thing that they care about mostly is, are we going to have enough cash to fund the business this next week, this next quarter, this next year, pay our employees, and also scale in a way that's meaningful for us? So a couple of the things that always stand out, I think since our earliest studies back in 1998, we found that best workplaces, that bucket of 100 best companies every single year, that they always outperform the Russell 1000 by a factor of at least 2x. So it does not matter whether it's a peak time in our economy or if it's a sluggish time in our economy, whether it still follows the pattern. So if the economy drops, those companies also experience those same drops. But they're always outperforming the basic bucket of companies in that index. And if you think about just certified organizations, so you've got the 100 best companies, but you've also got a large swath of organizations that are certified best workplace or great workplaces. So those are companies that meet a threshold of their employee experience. Those companies outperform the Russell 1000 by also 3x oftentimes. So that the performance metrics are already there for finance. One of the biggest newest pieces of research that came out is especially in times like this around how much value employees are creating. We found that the difference between some of the companies on our 100 best list and the companies, so the bottom quartile and the highest top quartile of those companies, the highest quartile of those companies, 8.5 times the revenue per employee. So that means, for an average company, for example, their employees might be bringing in $100,000 per employee. For some of these high performing organizations, their employees are bringing in 800,000 per. Now you can talk about what industries, and we could go down that rabbit hole, but just knowing that there's a revenue lift per employee when you're building a great workplace, I think is important. And then when you talk about all the other things like retention, customer satisfaction, all the things that we measure across all of our businesses, it's always a factor of 30 to 40 to 50% higher when you're focused in on trust and building great workplaces. So that data it shocked me, honestly, when I first started a Great Place to Work. I thought, just like everyone else did, like trust was a soft word. Trust was just something that was a byproduct of maybe making good money, or, if you're in one of those high flying tech companies, it's like, yeah, we've got ping pong tables and slides in the foyer. Of course, I'm going to trust this workplace. But what we saw was best workplaces outperform on every metric because they are focused on building great leaders who build trust. That trust and that experience is what shapes the culture that we're working in, that culture of collaboration, agility, and that way that we work is what drives those outcomes. And I think anybody can think about being on a team that worked well together and what you were able to achieve because of trust, because of how you worked, how you collaborated, how you were able to change on a dime when new information came. And then I know you also have the experience of working on teams that weren't so great, where people second guessed everybody's decision, when folks weren't clear on where we were headed, and didn't have that North Star in mind. So that's that. When you think about our research, we think about, like, how do we make sure that we're connecting that dot for those business leaders who have to make those decisions, back to this place of experience, because culture warriors, there's a lot of people in your companies who want the culture to be strong, who want the culture to be sustainable. And they're always looking for language to make sure that those business leaders can see the investments that they're making in people, the investments that we're making in the ways that we work, and the investment that we're making in giving the time of our leaders to build a great workplace. So at a high level, they outperform. And we've learned is that it always starts with great leaders.
Fantastic. Yeah, couple of things in the chat for people watching. I put a link. If people want to know more about Great Place to Work, I'd encourage you to set up a call with someone and dive into this. And as Julian said, you don't have to be a big company to find the benefit in connecting with them. You just need to be a leader with the intention of creating that kind of culture. And in the work that I do, everything that you said is validated in that same space. And one of the things that when I work with organizations, we'll take them through a process and teach them about how trust works. And oftentimes, I think the biggest mistakes that leaders can make is to assume both that trust is there, because we're good people, we're a good company, things are fine, and assume that everyone walking in the door that's coming to work for you has a grounding in trust in how it works, because we're shaped by our experiences, and we need to understand and really have a shared language, and a shared experience and what that should be, and a shared commitment to that. So we'll work with an organization, take them through the trust transformation training, and then have them adopt what we call a trust contract, and actually build that into their cultural construct. And it's derived from their mission, their vision, their values, their service standards, and the concepts of what makes us trustworthy, what makes us authentic, what makes us reliable in the things that we do, and what is it that sets us apart in terms of delivering on that consistently and being a good steward of that. And so creating it as operational and not aspirational, it really makes an impact in that area. And I'm sure you've worked with some specific organizations, and love for you to maybe even share a case or an example of a company, Julian, that you've seen and helped shepherd through that process.
Yeah, I will. But I have to comment that is fascinating. The trust contract, when we first spoke about that, I thought that was so wonderfully articulated and operationalized in a way that makes something that is, as you described earlier on, trust being very implicit, right? It makes it explicit. And I think what even by measuring trust through the trust index, that's really what we're hoping to do is take things that we believe to be true about how we shape an employee's experience and how we shape the experience of our customers and our clients, and make it into something that we can have a shared language around and a shared opportunity to change together as an organization. So I've had that. It's so funny. I would say when I was I called it myself like a baby consultant, like an associate consultant, where they would keep me in front of the computer, in front of an Excel spreadsheet for weeks at a time, and then sometimes send me out to go talk to some organizations. And when I walk into an organization, I can tell kind of by feeling now whether it's a great workplace, right? Or where they're somewhere on their journey. You can just tell by how the folks interact when you walk into the reception area, by how folks greet you and greet each other in the hallways. You can feel the vibe because I've been to enough organizations that were somewhere on their journey, and they'd bring us in to just have these conversations and share some of these insights. And you could just feel the tension. You could feel the mistrust in the air, and it's something that's tangible, even if you can't see it immediately. So I feel that at times. I will share one organization. And this is the power of this. Their leader, 14 years ago, 15 years ago, said, "I want to be a certified great workplace." Okay, so this is like, let's say 08-ish. They're looking at what's happening inside. Their business is really changing. Their people, this is the stock market was down. The whole economy was sluggish at that time. And they know they needed a change. And for many companies, their leaders would have probably started with, let's revamp our products and services. Let's let a bunch of people go. Let's get our cash together. They would have started on the financial side of the house. This leader said, I see a pathway that if we build great leaders who can build a great experience for our employees, that's going to translate into everything else that they do. And so over the last 14 years, this organization worked hard. Some years their scores were in the gutter. They would not have qualified for certification, right? And their people were telling them they needed to do things differently. So they started building up their leadership and their talent pipeline in such a way that they focused on developing their leaders to make their leaders much more compassionate, better communicators, better able to share the North Star and the purpose of the organization, things like that, to help their leaders be a beacon during uncertainty versus being a execution focused at 100% of the time. And over the last 14 years, they've worked really, really hard, and they actually made it onto our best workplaces list. So I'm not going to name the company because I wasn't, I don't want to share all of their story in that way, but they know who they are. The people who work there know who they are. And it started from just a little mustard seed of an idea and a desire to get better. And they work their hiney off to get there. So I always appreciate that, because it's very tough to tell a leader in a business that's running month by month. Sometimes people have mortgaged their homes, you know what I mean, to get these businesses going, to say, It's going to take you 14 years to build trust in your organization. No one's buying that, so it's tough to say that, but it's true for many companies. We know that happens. I'll also share one that was very powerful for me when I first started. We were at a small and medium-sized business summit that we had hosted at the time. And it was the first time that a CFO was on stage presenting their results from their employee experience and what that's done to impact their culture. So I remember sitting in the audience, I saw the CFO title, and I was like, what? I've never seen a CFO get up here. Usually you're the one I have to convince to invest the money, sometimes the most critical. But this CEO shared the story of how when he first came into the organization that he represented, he thought the culture work and all the things that they were doing around their employee experience was costly. And he thought that it just was not the best investment. He had come from another place where you just put money into where it needs to go, and you see what happens there. He said after about a year and a half, he started to really understand that what they were doing was showing up on their bottom line, and in their important, financial metrics. So he became a believer, and he became the person that went on the road show, not HR, not the CEO, not the CHRO. When they had to share this message of what the employee experience was doing, that gentleman and that team is who owned that experience, and they communicated that experience. Very few organizations do that to this day. So I say that as a differentiator for folks that might be listening and trying to figure out, how do we make sure that we're making the right investments and we've got the right stakeholders locked into the work around building trust and building a great organization. That CFO, when you're on those analyst calls, they're always on that call. If you can get your CFO to grab a hold of and be able to demonstrate what your efforts and your investments are doing across the business in terms of your revenue and your expenses, your EBITDA, your free cash flow, all those things, you've really got an ally. And that changes the trajectory of what this means. It takes it from something that's a soft skill to something that's very durable for your organization.
That's awesome. Yeah, and you mentioned a minute ago the intentionality and the explicitness of having a trust contract, and I'll give you a couple of real examples of how that plays out. So, worked with Tim Clark, who's the CEO of Advent Health, Heart of Florida, he had been given this responsibility to help turn around hospital operations at the hospital he's at. And we took the team through the experience. They adopted their trust contract. And about 15 months later, I interviewed Tim, and we talked about where they were. And so there were all the things you might expect in terms of how the culture was going well. People seemed happier. There was a lot better working relationships all around. And then when we got into the operational side of it, they had some pretty tough reports that had come in early on when they got there. So they were performing in the lowest quartile for customer experience. And in that case, they made about a 50-point turnaround within a year.
Wow.
Just on customer experience. And probably the most meaningful one was in some of the outcome areas. So from a clinical outcome standpoint, they were in the lowest quartile, the lower end of the outcomes for some of their hospital-based infections. And they made about a 70% switch within a year. And moved into that upper quartile for performance in that area. And so when we talked about it, and I asked him the question, how do you correlate or connect this to trust? And he said, everything works better, and people speak up when there's problems, and we get the kind of performance, and we keep the people who perform well longer. Right? And that's the math. That's all the math that CFO needs to see. And when you invest in it, when you invest in the people that way, you always get better outcomes.
That's absolutely right. I mean, I think that I love that they took that approach to say, like, we have to focus in on this. I think of a company that really believes in this work, Mosaic Consulting. Mosaic, if you ever go, Google them and see how they've described this, but they saved millions of dollars in turnover, in turnover costs, like headcount turnover, that allowed them to expand their business at a pace that, had they not discovered some of the linkages between where they were building and sometimes breaking trust with employees, if they hadn't had that data, and really looked at it, then that money would have just been spent. They didn't realize how valuable that experience was, and how much money they were paying to replace employees that they could save, that they could actually retain, and then use those financial gains to expand their business. So it is one of those things that when you're a leader and you're trying to figure out the value, no one wants to work for a company that's not like growing or expanding or making money, or at least staying stable. That causes a lot of uncertainty, which was a big topic of the summit this year, right? We talked about all the things that leaders are carrying every day today that aren't showing up, that you can't really you can't really talk about, right? So we're talking about AI. Everyone's talking about it like it's going to save the world. You have another group of people that are like, this is doomsday. Then you talk about things like, geopolitical conflicts that we're going through. For some industries, this is a boon and a boost. For other industries, it's creating a lot of uncertainty for people, and people are showing up with that every single day. So the thing that trust allows you to do, especially in moments like this, when you don't have all the answers, but you've got trust with people, you can help connect folks back to that North Star, to that purpose, to what it is that we're really trying to do. And while that feels soft to some people, that's what gets me up every day. It's not the paycheck. It's the people that I get to work with to try to solve these issues, and that motion. Now, the paycheck and the money is good, but I have to say that for most people that we've talked to, and leaders and employees alike, there's not enough money to deal with a environment that's low trust. People will leave. People will leave for 25 cents extra, especially in some of those frontline positions. And, you might get $1 extra if you move to this company or that company. People will do that. And they are not going to respond in a low trust environment. So that's one of the things that we've seen too, that investment, you're going to see it either grow on one end or seep out the back end if you don't.
Absolutely. And anyone that's on right now, if you do have questions, drop them in the chat. We're watching that as we talk, and want to make sure that if there's some specific things that you're interested in, we definitely talk about it. And Julian, there's a consistent theme that runs through all of this in terms of being intentional about creating that environment. And the other that you just leaned into, I think, really well, was investing in the people that are part of that environment, and creating that infrastructure that supports and cultivates and encourages trust every day. And I sat in the presentation that Mosaic made at the summit, and that's exactly what they did. They created that environment from within, and they stay on it and they stay with it. And there's a cadence, if you will, that an organization begins to adopt, and that cadence helps them live up to that promise that they're making.
Absolutely. I mean, trust is consistency, right? It's knowing that if you think about it in your household, right, how you show up every day, or what your family can rely on you to be and to be, that's when they trust you. If I come in one day I'm up, next day I'm down, next day I'm all the way around, they're like, what version of dad are we going to get today? But it's the same. It's the same for your people, right. That consistency is the thing that we measure. So when you talk about high trust workplaces, the experience that their employees are having is a highly consistent experience of communication from their leaders, a highly consistent experience of respect. So one of the biggest drivers of a great workplace culture, I've been on dozens, if not, I'd say dozens to be more fair, of key driver analyses, right? Where we look at a data set and say, for this organization, what's a key driver? And top 5 always for any organization is involvement in decisions that affect my work, my job or work environment. That's always one. And so when leaders are talking about, when you're talking about that consistency and that intentionality, being intentional about listening to people. So that's Trust Index is a listening part of your listening strategy, but listening to people. And as our CEO, Michael Bush, always says, it's not just listening so that you can be ready to insert your comment right after their comment. It's actually listening with the intent that what you might learn from this conversation could actually change your mind. That's a different type of listening. So that intentional listening, and then that intentional involving employees in what it is that they're doing, in the work that they're doing, asking for feedback, and then circling back with employees to say, hey, yeah, that's something we can implement. That's something that might be a little bit more mid-range, or hey, at this time, that's not it. We can't, that's not part of the direction, but keep it coming. That's the biggest loop, especially when you're early in your culture journey and you're not quite seeing the payoff, one of the things that I typically see is that they're not circling back with employees. They're getting feedback, and they're not coming back and saying, hey, this is what we're doing with the feedback. This is how the feedback is changing our decision making. Same thing with values. We talk about values a lot, right? In your mission, you have to use your values not just as something on the wall because they become stale.
Right.
When you are making decisions, you should be making them through the lens of your values, and you should be communicating it through the lens of your values. And then your people, when they're making decisions and you're not standing over them, they're also making them through the lens of your values and communicating the why through your values. So that's how you kind of start to operationalize some of the things that feel soft or feel like they're just on the wall. Well, they are until you put them into practice. And one other thing that I'll share too is, it's not about the initiative. So that's one of the things that I think that comes up when you talk about how much it costs for a small or medium-sized employee to kind of plan their programming and focus on culture. They think that it's about all of the perks. And that's one thing that I thought too in the 2010s, when all the tech companies were flush with cash, it was all perk. But our research had always shown that it was about how leaders behave. It was always about how leaders behaved. It was never about the perks. Those are good. But if your leader micromanages you, does it matter that you get a $50 spa card every other week? If you you need a $1,000 spa card every other week if you're getting micromanaged. So I think that's one other thing that I think people forget, that you have to focus in on the behaviors. It's the behaviors that lead people to trusting you. Do you keep your one-on-ones? That's my favorite one to harp on. Don't let go of your one-on-ones. For some people, that's the only time they get your full undivided attention, and they may have things they really need to talk to you about. So those are the type of things that when those are repeatable and you do those over and over in the cadence as you described, you actually build trust.
I'm going to pick up on what you just laid down, because it's gold. You had in everything that you said. I'm going to go back to the trust contract, right? So there's a method behind the madness here, and that is that nearly every organization that I walk into has a mission statement or some expression of what their purpose is. Then they have a vision of where they aspire to be one day. Values, because they want, to your point, they want to anchor to something that matters, and they want to be able to express that. But then how do you operationalize that? And that's where the trust contract comes in, because in the way we work through the trust transformation is you learn about the attributes that people look to for being trusted, which we've identified as to be trustworthy, authentic, dependable, and inspirational in how you live that as a leader. We talk about service. We talk about guiding principles, that we build trust from the inside out, that we take responsibility for the relationship. We talk about keeping our promises and communicating consistently. We talk about being a good steward of trust. And so once we walk through that and some of the ideas of how we identify the types of relationships and take action to do that, then with all of that, the mission, vision, values, the principles learned through the program, now they write it in their language. They write action statements. We will, we are, we not, very much in an affirmative way. And usually let's say we've got a room of 50 people and they're all at different tables, you're obviously going to get 100 ideas that come into that play. And then we work with the leadership to cull all of that up into 12 statements, 10 statements, whatever best represents that. And it's the actionable way that all of that should be lived out day in and day out. It creates the behavior standard for how we live out our mission, our vision, our values, and do so with trust as its underlying principle. And then we create an event, everyone signs it, and then everyone gets a copy of it. And if there is a conflict, if there's a question, if you're having a little bit of a friction with someone, the first question then should be, did you look at the contract, and are you following how we've said we're going to deal with those things together?
That makes it so explicit, Roy. I mean, it's incredible that Well, and it's hard, I have to say, it's hard because you're talking about accountability and holding people accountable for behavior. It makes sense, and I could see why some people might resist.
Yeah,
Some
sure.
people might say, I don't, is that what I want to? I'd rather
Right.
have a little bit more flexibility to break trust whenever I need to get the job done. But,
Yeah, I interviewed
something powerful, right? And when they keep it.
Yeah, a couple months ago, I was interviewing Pam Neighbors. Pam Neighbors hired me 11 years ago. Now, these ideas were germinating in a different form 11 years ago. Pam was one of the first people that stepped up and said, "Hey, I think this could really help us out." And one of the things she talked about as being the leader of the organization, that when one of your leadership team members is not living up to their commitments, if you have it codified in how we're going to deal with people, then it's not just what I think or feel, it's what we've agreed to. And so in a couple of cases where she really had to confront somebody and then ultimately ask them that maybe this isn't the place for you, it wasn't about how she felt. It wasn't about what her opinion of something was. It was, this is what we've agreed to. This is the construct that we work within. And so for a leader now, it gives consistency in how you may have to carry out more difficult decisions about personnel in terms of how you, put them in warning or on a plan or terminate them based on that. And again, you're moving trust from a soft idea to operational when you do that.
That's right. Yeah, I have a good friend right now that's scaling his law firm, and he is at the, sometimes when you're in business, right, you know that not having enough money but scaling too quickly also leads to you not having enough money. So the beauty of everyone saying, I want to scale this sometimes leads to you not having a lot of cash. You've invested a lot, you've got debt out there because of what you're trying to do. So the same struggle can appear. But we were talking a few weeks ago, and he was like, I feel like I have to be everywhere. I feel like I'm the one who has to enforce kind of like how we do things. I'm having all these conversations. And, I said, well, have you all does everyone know where y'all are headed and what you're trying to do? Because he has a very grand vision around the accessibility of law, of people having legal advice be accessible. And he's like, well, I say it. And I'm like, but does it translate into like how folks actually behave with each other and with your clients? And he goes, I don't know. And I said, well, then that's a place to investigate. I would say that one of the companies that, you see on the 100 best list, that is one of my favorite groups of people to work with is Synchrony, and their CEO, Brian Doubles, and their team, DJ Casto, Claudine Hoverson, all the folks on that team. I give them a huge shout out because they're in a difficult business in the sense that they do financial services. So your white labeled credit cards, you go to Home Depot, Synchrony is the bank behind a lot of those white labeled cards. And we know what's happening with credit, and we know how that business is shifting with all these new players and incumbents trying to figure out how that moves for people. And people are much more conscious of their finances right now and how much they're spending and where they're spending it. So I say all of that because they knew the business was changing and they had to change. They didn't just immediately go to the products and the services that they needed to change. Brian actually sat down. He'll tell the story if you see it on maybe one of our Great Place to Work channels, where he sat down over the weekend and said, my leaders are going to have to lead differently for the next 5 to 10 years. I'm paraphrasing, but they got to lead differently. So we have these values. Everybody loves it. We're doing great. Look at us moving up the charts for the Great Place to Work. We're doing a great thing there. But something has to change, and it has to start with us. And so he sat down and looked at the values and said, what are the behaviors that attach to each of these values? How do we show up every single day? Brought that back to the team. They probably did some battling, some creative abrasion, as we like to call it, to get it to the place it needed to be. But I appreciate that they started with leadership and did not start with the other things that you could start with that are, the levers that people tend to turn on the business side, financial side, employee count side. They started with, if we want to turn this thing up, we have to turn this thing up. And so that was every time I hear that story, I get goosebumps, because most leaders don't sit back in their office or their room or their boat or their yacht and say, what do I need to do? And what do we as leaders need to do to affect the business? It's more, what's the market, what's happening with the market? And
Yep.
how do we deal with competitors? You got to start with, great starts with leadership, as we like to say.
Absolutely. And just a couple more examples on this operationalized idea. One of our clients, Wendy Brandon, I talked to her last month on this platform. And when I first met her 10 years ago, one of the things that she did with their trust contract was one of the most creative operational uses of it, where when they hired a new person at a director level or above, 2 of her leadership team members would meet with them with a copy of it, a new blank copy of it. They would talk through why they use it, what it's about in terms of both the inspiration and accountability. And then the 3 of them would sign the fresh copy. It would go around to the rest of the team, who would re-sign it. And then they'd have to put a new one up where they displayed it on public in their HR department as people walked in the door. Wow. So it became part of your onboarding as a leader. And then it was always on public display where anyone would see it if they walked into the front door of the hospital.
Yeah. I mean, and you're talking about hospitals, like, how powerful a signal is that sending? People are trusting you're going to take care of their loved one, right? People are trusting, the people that are working are trusting that we're going to do the jobs as we know we need to do them, safety wise and other things. And, the hospital, that's the place that you better have the most trust. That and the airplane, you better have absolute trust in these two, in the functioning of these two places. So I really think that that's incredible that they did the re-sign. So that commitment, that circle of commitment continues to grow, and it shows that this person is bought in. Because what we do see, and I'm sure and anyone that's listening in has had that experience, where you've got a team that's been rocking and rolling, and then you want to bring in someone else from the outside to support some growth or some new, and that person hits the ground running, right? You got them doing the execution oriented things, but the how we do things around here gets lost. And now what are you leaving in your wake as you're getting this done? That happens more often than not. So that I really appreciate that practice of getting everybody bought in, and not just through a passive 15-minute, here's our culture video, but the actual signing of a document, of a Declaration of Independence, if you will, that we have a mission here of what we're trying to do, and you're a part of this. That's awesome.
Yeah, and I'd be remiss, since you brought up the airport. When I worked with the Orlando International Airport, their CEO at the time, Kevin Tebow, they took the team through. They drafted and built their trust contract, and then they made a name badge version of it. So the team would wear it every day and have it just on the back of the name badge that they could refer to it whenever they were having an interaction or needed a little reminder about how they should interact with people as they're having their difficult conversations.
Now, I know you're asking me questions. Can I ask you a question?
I would love you to ask me a question.
So, when you've had the best experience with leaders really buying in to trust being the thing, right? Because I'm sure some leaders think it could be this and it could be that. Yeah. But when you've had the best interaction with leaders really buying into trust, what was also true? Like, what made it possible for people to really climb on board to think about trust in this very pivotal way?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, it does have to start at the leader's position. I have walked into rooms where I've been invited to come in and begin this process, not by the leader, but by one of their subordinates, and quickly figured out that it was either a favor or last on the checklist for them. And right off the bat, you know that it's not going anywhere. Yeah. And so that's one thing I would just say, is that if you're a leader, you need to set the pace for this. You need to be the advocate for this. Yeah. But what I find consistently is that there's an understanding of the value of people from that type of a leader, and that their responsibility goes beyond the short-term performance. I love Simon Sinek's book, The Infinite Game, and the idea that we approach things with a bigger mindset than perhaps what we can see right in front of us right now, and go beyond. And I find that the leaders that are embracing the ideas that we talk about are the leaders that are taking the actions to make those things happen. I think Ed Bastian from Delta was a great example you talked about earlier, that in the midst of the trials that they were going through, that's when this emerged as their idea for caring for their people in such a way that their people could care for the markets and the clients and customers that they were serving.
Yeah.
And that's what makes a difference, is that you can see both beyond perhaps the immediate pressure that's happening in your market or in your business, and you have a sense for the humans that you're there to serve as a leader. You approach leadership, again, it may sound cliche these days, but from that Jim Collins perspective of servant leader mindset in the things that you do. So those would be some of the consistent characteristics that make it happen.
I agree wholeheartedly with both of those, and especially the one that it has to start at the top. When you see folks at our summit, and you're seeing these leaders on stage, they have a relationship with our CEOs. I mean, with our CEO, and they have a relationship with our. So when you can have people, when you're like, I think about the CEO of Trek, right?
Yeah.
He always talks about how each of his managers has their own scorecard based on the trust index. And it's because for him, it's fundamental. And he would say that they would not be in the position that they are in the market right now if they had not focused on trust, and if they had specifically not used the trust index as a way to understand where their gaps are. And I'll say for us at Great Place to Work, we really focus on this sense of creating a workplace that's great for all people. And not just the executives, not just the folks who work at HQ, not just the folks that are salaried employees, not just the ones who don't work swing shift. Like you have to think about all of the demographics in your organization, and that's where the work is never done. That's where the work continue, and you can always see as you get to the top of these, the top 10 workplaces on the Fortune 100 best companies to work for list. That's a game of inches. It's like any sport that you're playing, and you're seeing, if you're watching the NBA playoffs at any point in time, or if you're if you're around the world, you're watching the World Cup. When you get to those higher levels of play, there's not a lot of blowouts. It's a lot of discipline, consistent action happening over and over again, and someone just gains an advantage because somebody got caught slipping, or something happened to where you took your eye off the game. And that team came up, but it's not blowout. So I think about those companies that you see, they're working really hard to continue to tweak small parts of their organization, whether it's how their frontline managers are showing up for their individual contributors. That's a big gap that people find when people start working there. It's not always race, gender, and ethnicity, right? It's not all. Those are big places to play. But there's so many other places that folks that cross lines of folks' identities to their life. Who do you have responsibility for? In your family, in your household. Who do you are you a veteran? Do you have veteran? Like, there's so many ways that people's identities and the demographics help them or influence how they show up to work every day. When you're building a great workplace, you're always looking at that. And I'll say this as a pro tip, in our technology, in our tool, you can tell when people are logging in, right? So you can see when folks are logging in. Those best companies in this data every single week, if not daily. So that to me says it's not just a point in time measurement so that I can get certified, so I can apply for a list and get some sort of recognition. That to me means we're making business decisions, complex ones, and we need data to help guide our decision making. And this trust index data is an essential part of that decision making. So that's the difference too. If you're sitting out there and you're like, our culture efforts are stalling, or we're not quite sure, maybe it's because you took that data and you kind of used it at that point in time, and not say, well, we have to make a new decision. What can we glean from the data of our people's experience to help us accelerate that decision, and not stall it?
Great stuff. We're almost up on an hour here. I know we got a little bit of a late start, so we're going a little bit late to give people all the value that we had intended to in doing that. Again, I put the link to click on and set up a time to meet with someone from Great Place to Work. If you're interested in this, take that step. It's important. The other thing I'll share, and this kind of, again, this is not just a big company issue. It's big and small. And in the small companies that I'm working with, a lot of what leaders are trying to address is twofold. One is, how do we continue to maintain the success that we have, keep the best people that we have? But also, if you're an owner and you're not thinking about what's the exit strategy going to look like, and how will the culture not just be about me?
Yeah.
How does that culture live beyond what I'm doing and I carry and I intended it? And how do I get everyone to buy into the idea that this culture has to not be about one person or an opinion? That's the other reason to invest in these ideas. Talk to Great Place to Work. I'm happy to connect with you and talk about how building that into your cultural construct makes a difference. And so grab the Great Place to Work link if you want to learn more about what they do and talk to some of their team members. I've also put in the chat an opportunity to schedule a 30-minute conversation where perhaps we can talk about some ideas that will allow you to put these principles to work immediately in your organization and explore other options to do it. And with that, Julian, any parting shots or words of wisdom for those that are either watching live or the hundreds that'll watch once we get this thing posted?
Well, if they made it this far, thank you. That's awesome. And the only thing I'll add, and I think it's something that we share, Roy, in this work, is that it really starts with listening. It starts with having the desire to want to know what's happening with your employees and how they're experiencing you as a leader, and how they're experiencing the things that you do. So once you crack that door of curiosity, you will have tough days where sometimes the data doesn't tell you, what you wanted to say. But what we know is that the best leaders keep coming back for it, because they know that if they get stronger and more consistent and build trust in measurable ways, that their organizations get stronger. I haven't seen an organization get weaker because their leaders were building trust with their people and building trust with their clients and customers. I don't think that happens. So it feels like a very natural thing to do. That would be the only thing I'd say, other than thank you for the time, for the questions, and for sharing everything that you did today, Roy.
No, this was great. I'll close with one quick story. My wife and I have been married 36 years. We have 4 kids. The older 3 are boys and the youngest is a little girl. And my daughter's just 24, graduated from University of Central Florida. But when she was 5 years old, she loved to do what little girls love to do. And I came home one Friday night and she turned our dining room into a bracelet factory. And you're laughing because the danger of those things all over the floor on bare feet.
Yes.
And so she had this bracelet, said, "Daddy, will you wear it?" I said, "Absolutely." Put it on. It was Memorial Day weekend, so we were out and about, and I was show and tell for anyone that would listen to her talk about how she made it and how proud she was of it. I get up on Tuesday morning and I got to go to work, and I'll date myself a little bit here. I had to put a suit on because clients had dress codes back then. And so I put the bracelet on the dresser and went off to work. When I got home that night, Faith is still making bracelets like crazy, and Kim and I are in the kitchen, and she walks in and she's got another bracelet, and I think, "I've only got so much arm to give to your cause." And she looks at me and says, "Daddy, if you didn't like the other bracelet, will you wear this one?" A heartbreaking moment for a dad. to be this expert in communications and all these other things. And there I blew it with my 5-year-old. So I went in the bedroom and I put the bracelet on and I wear it every day. And this is it.
Oh, wow.
This is version 3.0. And I'm closing with this because here's the 2 reasons I wear it. Number 1, I told her I would. And number 2, and what I hope everyone will walk out of here with, it reminds me that every little thing that I say or do is either contributing to or taken away from the trust that people have in me. And so for all of the big and grand ideas we talked about, as Julian said, it comes down to very small moments. It comes down to having that intentionality. It comes down to being aware about what you're doing at any given moment and recognizing that the small interaction that you may be having could very well be the most important interaction that somebody else is having. And Julian, I want to thank you for your time today and for your friendship and for the amazing things that you and your colleagues at Great Place to Work do. I hope people will click in and check in and learn more about you as we go forward.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. Thanks everyone for being here.